And welcome to episode 42 of Delightful Dissent. Today's guest is Sara Kedge, who's a business consultant, university lecturer, and neurodiversity advocate. So welcome to the show, Sara.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you on. And today we're going to be talking about the idea that you just don't understand. And I really want to get into this one because I spent a lot of my life, it feels like, struggling to be understood and at the same time being really afraid of being misunderstood. And I've seen it going on in so many different workplaces, even as I become more aware of it and started working with it. So this is a really big, interesting one to get into. If you happen to be new to Delightful Dissent, though, this is an idea that really came about through my work talking to people who were taking a different approach in whatever that they're doing and making their own way. Sara is definitely one of those people. But doing this work, I found out that it was very easy to trip over these kind of hidden barriers, these hidden assumptions, that never really got brought to mind, but caused real issues for anything kind of unconventional or doing things in a different way. And I really want to challenge some of those in this show and share some ideas that will help everyone kind of specifically, but perhaps more importantly, I want everyone to be able to do this, to challenge the assumptions that are holding them back and causing them problems. So perhaps more importantly than anything specific, hopefully the show gives you some ideas about how you might go out there and challenge some stuff yourself. I also want to really normalize this idea of exploring and not having all the answers all the time. Because, most podcasts you listen to, they feel a bit like a lecture where everyone's just telling you answers and stuff. This is much more of a live exploration. We'll be finding out and going through things as we go. It is genuinely live, so there may be difficult topics. We're likely to touch on quite a lot of stuff around neurodiversity today, and there may also be strong language. So if either of those things are an issue for you, then please just be warned that they may be coming up. It's called Delightful Dissent, really, because, we are going to challenge some stuff, but it's not about being right and making everyone else wrong. It's about exploring different ways of understanding things and really being playful with it. It's not all that serious, even when it's serious. So So I first met Sara a few weeks ago when we had a short call that turned into quite a long one, which is always a good sign.
I think it ended about an hour and a half, didn't it?
Yeah, it was. I think it was supposed to be 20 minutes. And I was really struck by her. But certainly really wide knowledge of the space. It was really nice to not have to explain myself quite as often as sometimes I have to, but really an ability to talk about the serious stuff without it ever getting heavy in a very fun way. So so I really wanted to get her on the show, but that's probably enough of me talking. So could I ask you to describe your work and the kind of people that you like to work with, please?
So yes, so I if I talk about who I am first, so let me talk about me, because this is about me. My name's Sara. I am 43 years old. I have got green hair. I've got a blue top on with merry, happy, and bright. You can't see the bright on. And I'm standing behind a pink and black screen. So that's what I look like. I've got green eyes. And I am massively dyspraxic and ADHD, inattentive as opposed to hyperactive. And I love, my work takes me to work with lots of different people. So with my my partnership with my friend Sue, we have a company called Neurodiverge, and we go into large multinational organizations. We term them infrastructure organizations. So they're the companies that build systems that we all use, and we go in there and we help them to understand neurodiversity, help them to make shifts in their culture, their policies, processes, systems, to make it more neuro-inclusive. And the reason we do that is because our mindset is, if we go into the infrastructure organizations, the people that organize, train, design systems for everybody else to use, then the neurodiversity inclusion is going to sort of filter out. This is our plan. My personal, my it's a mission. Uh, my other bit is I work one to one with entrepreneurs, particularly neurodivergent entrepreneurs, and I help them to take their big business ideas and shape them into a business model, and then do all of the stuff with them, sort of coach and support them in more of a consultancy way rather than a coaching way, to actually set up their own business and live the life they really want to live. So those are the people I tend to work with.
Cool, brilliant stuff.
Yes.
It's interesting how much we perhaps we do share quite a lot of a similar approach to stuff, and perhaps a slightly sneaky way of getting neurodivergence more of a thing, more of a mainstream thing.
Well, you know what the thing is that there are lots of organisations and lots of people out there doing incredible work on an individual basis and working with delivery organisations, and they're doing massively good work in sort of raising the awareness around neurodivergence and that people's brains do work differently. But in terms of where I'm at, I'm like, actually, that's fabulous work, but I want to do things that are going to filter down and affect more people, sort of more of a systematic approach to things. So it's sort of like we're doing the kind of top down stuff. But yeah, we do. And I think that's why we ended up talking for about an hour and a half, isn't it? It's because we just kind of went, and this, and this, and this.
Yeah, definitely. So how did you come to doing this? What is it that kind of brought you to doing exactly this kind of work?
Well, so if I could talk about my sort of awareness, my own neurodivergence, because I always, that might be a nice place to start because there's kind of a long story, but I was always aware that I didn't quite fit in, and this is where the sort of like the you just don't understand comes in. I sort of grew up at a point where I was like, people don't quite get me. You don't quite understand what I'm saying, or I'm really confused by what you're doing because that makes no sense to me. And in a way of, I'm quite a literal person. So if I say something, I'm saying it quite literal, but many people talk to me in nuances and abstracts. And I'm like, I don't quite understand what you're talking about. Anyway, so I've always known that I was quite different, but it wasn't until I went and did my MBA and I couldn't use their online portal called Moodle, which is a god-awful product. I apologise to the Moodle people, but please, for God's sake, do something about it. If I could get in and talk to Moodle people that design Moodle, I will be a happy kitten, because that... Anyway, I couldn't use Moodle. And that led me down a path of student support services and then getting this wonderful diagnosis. And it wasn't for another 4 years until I started to actually understand what that meant for me. And it was at the point when I left my hopefully last ever job, that I was just like, actually, I'm going to go back and do I tried. I'm 43 years old. I got my first job at 13. I've tried so hard and for so many years to fit into businesses. Dyed my hair brown, grown my hair long, dressed the right, learnt how to act in a way that is expected of me in that space. And it's just no. I just no. So when I came out to work self-employed this time, just before the pandemic, it was just like, okay, so what am I going to do? I've done business consultancy for years and business consultancy type roles for years, and it just kind of sort of grew. I met a gorgeous human being called G. Sabini Roberts, who was starting a podcast called The Entrepreneurial Show, and they were looking for a neurodivergent community host. And that's kind of grown from there. So we've got a small community, smallish, about 500 people, neurodivergent entrepreneurs, and we provide support, guidance, training, stuff to just help people whose brains work in a different way to run their own thing. So that's kind of how I got there, really. That's that short history.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I think I'd like to return to how important community is in some of this when we start thinking about ways to deal with some of the issues that come up with that. So I think for me, it's always been a huge thing as well. And if I think back to my early experiences of suddenly landing in community, where I did suddenly fit in, and the shock of that, the joy of that, it's just such a yeah.
It's also very peculiar because when we get people sort of landing in our space, landing in the entrepreneur H2E space, people are like, oh, what you mean? I don't have to explain myself, and it's okay for me to fidget and move around and not have my. It's welcoming and wonderful. It's like, it feels like you're putting those slippers on that are just really comfortable, and you feel like you're coming home, but at the same time you're a bit confused because for the whole of your life you've been expected to do things to fit into somewhere else, so you're a little bit discombobulated by, actually, I can just be the real me.
It feels really quite naughty not to adapt.
Yes, naughty. Love that. Yes, it is. It is very naughty, and it's a bit unusual. But once people start settling into the fact that it's okay, so we on a Wednesday mornings we have like a peer coaching session, and it's a marvelous space because in neurotypical spaces, so neurotypical is a piece of language you use for anybody who's not neurodivergent. Neurodivergent for includes ADHD, autism spectrum, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, tic disorders, and acquired neurodivergence. For me, my friend and I are having a conversation where the giftedness is included in that.
It's
But
a
anyway,
yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah,
that's
I don't want to
another
go
cycle.
too far down that particular rabbit hole right now, but I think maybe
No,
we
let's
could
not.
have another conversation about that.
Yeah, no, let's not go down that road. So yeah, so when you've got people that are sort of neurodivergent, they're sort of coming into this space and they're sort of being able to stim or tick or be themselves. It's a bit bizarre, but then you see them sort of relaxing, and then the sort of the interactions that we get on a Wednesday morning are fabulous. We don't have small talk, because why would you? We don't. There's nobody in the space that feels a need for small talk. We just get on and do things, and we interact with each other in a way that doesn't cause trauma or distress, or we listen and we respond, and people are able to say, that doesn't work for me, what I need is. And that starts to sort of build, is that breaking down those things that we've been expected to do and giving permission to people to be understood, to be heard, to be seen, and to have requests um, respected and made for them. And that's one of the wonderful and gorgeous things about the entrepreneurial community, is that we're sort of giving people permission to do these things.
Mm. No, it really is. It's so, yeah, on some level, it's just a relief, I think, to know that these spaces exist. I think, yeah, that's one of the really, really huge things for me is how much better it makes me feel about things in general. Simply just knowing that the things are there, not even necessarily participating in them, but knowing it's a possibility, that thing is available, is so really valuable. I want to, I do want to really get stuck into the assumption, but before we do, I like to ask people to bring a quote along, and share a quote. So, have you got something that you'd like to share with us?
I do. So I got given this quote. I don't know where it comes from, but I got given this a couple of weeks ago. And it's a quote that says, there will be somebody out there waiting to hear what you have to say in exactly the way that you're going to say it. And for me, that's a quote that's just like, actually, for a lot of the time, we feel like, or we're made to feel like, our true authentic selves, our neurodivergent selves, the way our brains work, aren't as valid or welcomed. And actually, so when we run businesses, there's almost this imposter syndrome that nobody's actually going to get us or going to get the things that we do, or in the way that we do them. But actually, there is the community out there, and the world out there. There will be enough people out there waiting to hear what you have to say in the way that you're going to say it. And it's that sort of accepting that uniqueness and celebrating that I love about that quote.
Yeah, it makes me think of the idea that, all our experience is valid and valuable, and that sometimes we can experience it as one or the other. Certainly I have in the past. It's like, okay, this is how I experience the world, and I'm just going to adapt to everyone else to make my, to get any extrinsic reward, any external rewards, or get paid, or get, praise, or do well at school, whatever it is. And the two had to be separate.
Yeah, yeah, they're not. They're not. You can hold them at the same time.
Mm.
But there is work for you to do to get to that point.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, and it's not done. It's not given to us in the way that perhaps lining those things up is in necessarily if you happen to be more conventional in the way that you experience the world. I think it is something that tends to develop for most or many convention people who are more conventional, but it's not. It's something you kind of have to figure out and go looking for if it's not given to you.
Quite, and I think for many neurodivergent people, we are throughout the whole of our lives we're given these gifts, which are titled request for me titles request to modify. So our family, our teachers, our friends are making these gifts of us. The gift is, if you modify your behavior, how you think, how you present, then you can, like you say, you're going to get this reward of social interaction, of pay, of friendship, of acceptance. And it's in order to see yourself as being valuable and valued, it's unpacking those requests to modify and going, actually this one is in more, you're asking me to be valued by doing this, but actually I can be valuable without that, and being able to put those gifts down and putting them away. But there's a lot of unpacking that goes along to get there.
Absolutely, I think I would like to take this, yeah, to bring in the assumption now, and this idea that you just don't understand, and I think for me it really ties up with that partly in what is involved in me meeting the conditions. When I've experienced that, and then been told, and then met them in my own way, and then been told that wasn't right. And I think it's a very strange experience. It's like, well, I as I've understood it, I've done it. Are we not? Are you not happy? Apparently not. And that as a kind of pervasive, ongoing experience through childhood and into adulthood it does things. It's a hard thing to work with.
Absolutely. So, I mean, certainly in the sort of professional corporate space, when you're trying to behave in a way that you're in, because of course when we're going to work, we want to get paid, and many of us want to progress, so that means we want to get promotions and do well and do better. In order to achieve that, we have to adhere to the cultural norms and the expectations, or we're asked to adhere to the cultural norms and expectations in response to that reward. And many of these things are very implicit. There's no rule book that says how you must behave, and there's, because that would be helpful. And in how to behave in certain quantities and in certain ways. And I think it's that thing. I can understand as well as I can from what I see, learn, hear, and can mimic, but I'll just never quite understand the expectations, because which is why I never quite got it right on how I should be behaving. I just never quite got it, and I never don't think I ever will, and I don't think many people do.
I think it's an extraordinarily hard thing to do. One of the things that I've really noticed is actually as I've worked creating some, or really like working within spaces where neurodivergent people are the norm, essentially, is how difficult it can be for people, actually for other neurodivergencies or who are neurotypical, to function and adapt in those spaces, and how extraordinarily difficult it is, I think. And the thought that is simply an adaptation, we're just moving that much, and actually to participate in the conventional spaces, that someone neurodivergent is adapting that much in the other direction is often overlooked. And it's like, and so people tend to get, well, okay, this is what we need, this is how we represent our needs. I can think of all of the tools, particularly that some autism spaces are really, really good at surfacing and being like, okay, well, this is how we represent our needs, and these are, and actually being very clear about that. and those don't exist in conventional spaces very often. It's a really
I think
interesting point.
well, absolutely, and no, absolutely. And when you're talking about, I'm thinking about the sort of the certainly in British culture, we don't hold curiosity very well. We don't explore with each other what works. We're not allowed culturally, generally, to say, actually, this is really noisy. I'm going to need you to turn the music down, or at least ask a person, how do you like to be? How do you find it easiest to engage with? So we don't hold the curiosity with each other to say actually what's going to make ourselves feel to perform best and to show our best selves or bring our best selves into the space. And it's the lack of the curiosity and the engagement and the negotiation which creates these environments of exclusion, whether it's the autism only spaces where they create them to be essentially appropriate and stimulate, no, that's not the right word, centrally appropriate for people with on the autistic spectrum generally. But we don't navigate very well as human beings, or at least we've lost the art of asking the questions, is this okay for you? And actually holding that curiosity with somebody and then responding to it in a way that doesn't make that person feel as if there is something wrong with that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think it really talks to the other side of you just don't understand, for me, which is that when I haven't understood, I've always been intensely curious. It's one of the main things that it's a huge driver for me, that kind of the exploration of knowing stuff I didn't know before and understanding things in new way. Um, and I remember, even as quite a small child, getting into quite a lot of trouble for the questions that I asked. Um, like either in terms of, you shouldn't ask that kind of thing, or don't bother the person now, they're busy, or any of that kind of, and so, but we aren't given the opportunity to develop the capacity to ask those questions well. It's not something that we're encouraged to do, and in many ways, I've sometimes actually in professional context been met with quite a lot of anger or resistance when I have questioned it. It's seen as challenging authority. And for me, because I don't have the clarity, I don't share that frame of reference, I'm actually left really not knowing how to proceed at all without getting that clarity. And it's seen as a deliberate threat in some ways. But for me, it's like, well, if we can't have this conversation, I'm kind of left just guessing as to what you want.
And then I don't understand, so I then don't give you what you want, so then you get angry at me, and then that's a whole bunch of bullshit and me feeling bad about myself.
Yeah, I go away and do something, and then it's like, well, it's not what you wanted. Well,
I did try and ask you the question:
yeah.
is it, in what way, in what volume, in what style, and how much of that do you want? But actually, that was the wrong thing to do. Also,
It's an interesting one. I think one of the things that if you share any different perspective, if you're in any you belong to any group of kind of minority perspectives, whether that's culturally or through neurodivergence, or gender divergence, or different sexuality, you kind of you experience very regularly the message that other people experience things differently to you. It's it goes, it's part of a pervasive experience. Almost to the point at which it can become overwhelming. Actually, I find one of the things about having a subtle difference, and a difference that tends to be overlooked by people who are not familiar with it, is that I don't experience the kind of microaggressions that people who do have an obvious difference do experience. Instead, I experienced something that I kind of starting to think of as micro gaslighting, as that small regular invalidation of my way of experiencing the world, rather than it being like, it's not a direct challenge, but it's like, well, if but that my experience in the world is just wrong somehow. It's not, you're not experiencing it like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then that comes into that sort of actually that I actually quite like that, because my brain's not going, actually that then extends into the sort of like, because with gaslighting you feel compelled then to explain yourself, and actually from my queerness and my neurodivergence, actually I'm quite used to walking into a space and outing myself. Yes, I have a partner who's female, and yes, I am neurodivergent, and this is what that means. So almost that sort of that micro gaslighting just sort of like gets me to respond with a coming out story, and sort of having to explain and validate myself in a way that you neurotypical people generally, or non-queer people, will understand. So I feel constantly, and so when people first come out, and when I talk to tend to be heterosexual people, when I talk to non GSRD people, that they think you come out once. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And it's the same when you're aware of any difference. It's like it's almost like a linear and single process. You come out once, you explain to people once, you help them understand once, but actually you do it on a daily basis to help people understand how you work and why you're presenting in the way that you're presenting, or why you don't understand what they're talking about, or what's going on with them. And I think that's one of the things I'd like people to understand. You just don't understand that differences are stressful, partly because you don't understand. You don't understand. Hang on, how am I getting this? How the words aren't coming out right. I'd like them to understand that the lack of their awareness is stressful, and that causes me to have to try and make you understand on a constant and perpetual basis. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, very much. The idea of kind of constantly explaining myself, defending why I have behaved this way, why I do that. It's that fear of like, I always need to justify myself, my way of being. And it's, for me, if when I go out into a space openly around neurodiversity, I identify non-binary, so around gender and things like that, are it's almost like a preemptive thing. It's like, because if I do what I would naturally do,
Yeah.
I'm gonna get in trouble somehow.
Yeah, I'm going to other myself. So I might as well get this over and done with, out of the way, so that I can just get on with being in the space. And that's, yeah. And that's yeah. It's hard work.
It is. I think for me, a lot of it is almost this defense of being like misread. I think this is one of the really big things, and this is like is amongst people who are with a common set of experiences, it's fairly safe to infer someone's internal state from their behavior. It's fairly safe. It's not that reliable, but we do it. That's how we work. Humans, we need to do some of that. We should always check, but a lot of the kind of conventional ways that people work together are based on those kind of inferences. Is that I can work out roughly what you're thinking about this by how you behave. If someone experiences the world in a different way, those inferences are very unsafe. And so they lead to us being misread over and over and over again. And what happens when we call people on that misreading is actually a big indicator for me of actually how welcome I am in that space, and how much I want to continue participating in it.
But I also think there's something around, because most of the time, actually, no, let me step back from most of the time. There is something around, because sometimes for me, it spills over. that constant requesting, that constant having to sort of like justify, validate myself, that constant stuff. And the sort of like the micro gaslighting just spills me over into from being quite a calm person where you can infer that everything's going on, and I start getting a bit shitty. I start getting a little bit aggressive, and then people are like, well, you're just one of those angry sorts, aren't you? And I'm like, well, what you don't understand is that your behavior to me is that one behavior, but I've had 50 of those today, and right now I'm a little bit tired, haven't eaten, and yours was the straw that broke my camel's back. So yes, I am a little bit on the aggressive side. And actually, when you look at some of the neurodiverse communities, there is a sort of like an othering of neurotypicals, and almost sort of the I wouldn't say hatred. Hatred is a very big word, but I think there's a sort of a disdain for neurotypicals, and sort of like almost sort of people sectioning themselves away from neurotypical society, and sort of almost that hostility around, well, you don't understand, so you go over there, we're going to come over here, and never the twain shall meet.
And it's
But I think
it's completely understandable. But yeah, it's it doesn't seem helpful in the long run. Once people have kind of recovered the energy, and there's also an energy thing. It's like it is draining, it is hard, and that means that sometimes there just isn't the capacity to do that. And I think that acknowledgement of limited capacity is a huge thing in general, and that all people have limited capacity. It's more that the one of the things that is misunderstood is that where people do have a certain sort of limited capacity, the world that is designed, where the world is designed for them, you don't tend to notice that because it supports them in that. Where if you have a different set of capacities, it can be really quite difficult because you bounce off the edges in both directions. You're like, I could do loads more of this, and now we're stopping. And you're like, I'm exhausted now, and I need to stop. And everyone's else like, well, okay. So it can be really difficult in both ways.
I also think there's something around because with thinking about sort of like the hostility is that when you become aware of your neurodivergence, you almost go through a grief cycle. So there's this sort of like there's almost like it's you sort of like the creeping awareness, and then you're like something generally smacks you in the face, and quite often it's something really subtle that makes you go, oh, that's what's going on with me. But then at the point you start getting to your awareness, you start exploring that awareness, you then go on this wonderful not wonderful, it's wonderful. Yeah, this grief cycle and this journey through, oh my gosh, I'm not really. Oh, maybe I am. And you sort of like going through this awareness. And part of going through this sort of like growth and becoming completely aware of yourself is the shoulda, woulda, coulda phase. If only I knew about this earlier, I coulda, I should have been able to, would have done this, and I would have been in this different space. And I think it's quite often at that point in people's neurodivergent awareness journey that hostility sort of grows, and it's like, actually, if I'd have known about my neurodivergence and put a name to it and worked out how I could communicate what my need is, things might have been different. And it's at that point where you start getting that real hostility and that sort of resentment around, actually, I do have limited capacity. I do have things that I need to do in a different way. But I'm only just finding out today, at the age of, for me, it was about 35, that this is how to communicate that. And that's where it comes back for me, around that you don't just understand, and that comes back to that. So we're not taught as from very early on to be able to communicate what we need. We are taught to conform.
I think that those needs aren't respected very often either. This is one of the, for me, this is one of the frustrating things around this, is on some level the idea that I need to represent myself as neurodivergent in order to get access to, in order to for things to be made accessible to me, is problematic on the level that, first of all, it excludes people who don't have that, who don't have a formal diagnosis of anything for whatever reason, because it doesn't fit, because they haven't had, there's a privileged aspect of that in the first place. And secondly, simply, why can't we take people's word for their needs at all? I mean, why can't we just say, okay, I need this to be like this, this is difficult, rather than just being like, this is how it is.
And I think that starts from childhood, because we start with this sort of presumption that children should develop in this particular thing along this graph. There is a sort of what's normal, and people should be doing these things at those times. And we're, even from very young, we're asked to conform to a set of behaviours and expectations, rather than parents engaging with their children and the young people and understanding what their needs are and what their growth is and where they are in their own personal journey. We're always trying to shoehorn them into a space. And then when we go into primary school, and we're told that we need to behave in a certain set of ways, and we need, for example, lesson lengths. Lessons are generally an hour. Mate, my brain was never going to cope with a whole hour's worth of sitting down and listening. I mean, I was just never going to happen. But we don't think about, and when teachers go through teachers, they get taught about multimodal lessons and sort of right thinking about, but actually there's no opportunity for me as a young person, or me as a young adult, or even me as a big adult, to be able to say actually what my needs are. And we've never been given the opportunity to be able to say that it's okay for me to say actually what I need is this meeting to last no more than 30 minutes. What I need is to turn those lights off.
I think for me, even being able to state needs as clearly as that is something that we don't get the opportunity to develop. One of the difficult things about adaptation is like, well, okay, well, how, how can we fix this? It's like in some circumstances, like it's not necessarily just the burden of the person who has the need to figure that out. I think this is one of the interesting things, particularly working with adults in organizations, is the organization being like, well, okay, what do you need? I don't know. I have a problem, and I have to figure out the entire solution to everything as well. It becomes a very tricky, and that's not to say people can't take that on and can't have a role in that and shouldn't have a say in that, but for them to be solely responsible for essentially fixing a system that is designed outside of their interest isn't fair.
No, and I think this is where the sort of when I go into organisations, it's taking the approach that actually it's not my job as the neurodivergent person to tell you what I need. It's also not your job as the organisation to tell me what I can have. This is a conversation. And it's a mutual conversation where you start to build that curiosity and experimentation about, you need me to, I don't know, build 50 widgets in this time scale. These are the things that I find challenging. These are the things you've observed being challenging. What ways might we do things together to get me to make my 50 widgets by that time to that quality? So it's starting to develop, going into organizations and trying to start to develop these this curiosity and this negotiation approach, which is ultimately going to help not just the neurodivergent people, because you shouldn't just be doing this stuff with the neurodivergent people or the people with disabilities. You should be doing it with everybody. Because actually what inclusion looks like in an organization is everybody being given the opportunity to bring their best selves into work and to give their best quality work and to build a community that supports, encourages, and is a bit of a joy to be in. And that doesn't mean just doing it with me as a neurodivergent person. That also means doing it with everybody. Let's hold curiosity with everybody about how are we going to get the best out of you? How are we best going to meet our customer needs? And then sort of negotiate and experiment with things, because there are going to be some things that are going to work for me that won't work for you, and that won't work for somebody else. So it's that sort of developing, rather than that sort of almost scientific management approach, which has been so popular for so long, where everybody needs to fall in line and provide everything in the same way at the same time and the same quality. And actually, what we need to develop is more of a more organic, I want to say not microcosm. What do you call that thing where the
Ecosystem.
planet is? Ecosystem. That's it. The word ecosystem. Is develop an ecosystem of symbiotic relationships where everybody's getting a little bit of what they want to be able to be supported to provide a benefit to the whole of the organisation.
Mm.
And I think that's something that I'm really sort of passionate about sort of doing and bringing to organisations, is that understanding which starts from asking questions.
And I think for me, one of the really important things that I like to share is that the the value of having a different, fundamentally different perspective, actually seeing
Mm.
the world, experiencing the world in a really really different way on a qualitative level, whilst it presents all of these problems of understanding, it also enables you to be aware and to understand things in different ways and see things that other people just don't, because that worldview is not no one's worldview is complete. And by integrating those, by joining those up within that ecosystem, everything within the system benefits. It's like we can share our awareness and our ability, and that is actually one of the really important drivers for me of why anyone who's even who isn't in one of these groups would care.
Mm.
It's not a charity thing. It's that the system, the people in the middle of the system who benefit most from it, the continuation of that system is dependent on integrating the stuff that's at the edges.
Yes. 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 I would agree with you absolutely. And I think there's also quite dangerous. You said it's sort of there's also something quite dangerous in sitting down with somebody who doesn't share the same world belief as you, or share the same life experience as you, or at least so for some people with neurodivergence thing, two dyspraxics sitting down will be in very different spaces in their journey, their awareness, their understanding, their life experience. So being able to sit down and sort of hold curiosity around what my life experience is and what your life experience is, where are the crossovers and where are the separations, and being able to sit with the bits that rub against each other, that you disagree with, is a really important skill towards developing understanding, rather than going, you must agree with me, otherwise you're wrong. That's not going to help understanding. That's not going to help growth. It's not going to help development. It's not going to help people to thrive and grow and be part of the world.
Absolutely. It's in general kind of introducing the spaces where we are more understood is is actually quite difficult. You know, there's work involved in this. I think that's one of the really important things. I mean, as we're I would like to invite anyone watching live to share any questions they've got at this point, because we covered quite a range of stuff in a way that is probably relatively straightforward for someone who has an ADHD brain to follow, but may not be for anyone else, or not quite as straightforward. Yeah, so if you have any questions or would like any clarifications, please do share them in the chat, and we'll see if we can engage with them. But I'd also like to start thinking about really ways that we can kind of try this out and grow this ourselves. So with whatever in whatever situation we happen to be in, whether we happen to find ourselves being regularly misunderstood, or whether we want to kind of seek more understanding from others, what ways could people kind of start to approach this?
I think firstly is that sort of being courageous in asking the questions and modeling that curiosity. What when somebody talks to you, what I think you mean to me is, you said to me is this: do I understand that correctly? Or if you observe somebody being slightly uncomfortable, to be courageous and brave and say, you don't look quite comfortable right now. Is there something that you need? To start modeling that curiosity with each other, and to sort of say, and to be courageous to sort of ask the questions. You look quite uncomfortable at the moment. Are you okay? What do you need? So I think that's one of the first most important things. And also experimenting. Secondly, for if you're to develop understandings, experimenting with offering what I need is, or experimenting in terms of what you might need. So for I don't know, with if you have fluctuating energy levels, experiment, go to bed later, experiment going to bed earlier, experiment with Pomodoro's techniques. If you are somebody who struggles to get tasks done, do an experiment with yourself. Try different models of planning, because when you start doing these experimentations, you start to gather data and information that enables you to then communicate with somebody else. So when you go to do, I don't know, if you're setting up a business and you know that, for me, keeping bits of paper and organizing accounts and that sort of system is just but I've done enough experimentation with myself that I know that these are the things I need help with. And because I've done the experimentation, and because I've and I think this comes into sort of like doing it badly, I think there's one of those things about sort of going, actually, sometimes you're going to get it wrong, and doing it poorly is just as valid and important as finding out the actual answer, because that gives you, again, it gives you data to be able to communicate with other people around what it is they don't understand about you and what you need. What would you say was needed? What would you say with the things?
Yeah, I think that it's a really there's so many levels that this works on, and I think in some level it can be overwhelming, because it's like all the things, and that's partly, that experiencing things as overwhelming because they're all the things is partly an ADHD quality anyway. But I think in this circumstance, it's something that is common to most people's experience of it. It's like, where do I start? Because there's so many possibilities, so much to do, so many different approaches. I think for me, completely trying stuff out, seeing what happens, to the level that you are comfortable. So it doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to go all the way straight away. That's one of the other things. It's like, try this out in small spaces where you feel it's okay if it goes wrong. Because for many of us, it isn't actually okay in a lot of our lives, for it to go wrong, particularly initially when we start. We don't have that support. We don't have the confidence, and we don't necessarily have had the chance to develop the skills to handle what happens when it goes wrong.
Yeah.
And that comes over time. That's practice. So putting ourselves in the position where we can is a huge part of it, but also making it, I think play is actually a huge part of this, in a sense, because it's that playfulness when something isn't like life or death. If it's too serious, you can't play with it. You have to have certainty, and then it's no fun. So in many ways, it's like, for me, it's like taking a step back when I get really stuck and being, okay, what would be a fun way to approach this? How could I add some fun to this? How could I make this more interesting? How could I make this more exciting? Rather than thinking more about solving the problem. Because when I get more about solving the problem, I tend to get narrower and narrower and narrower, and miss the really easy, straightforward, and more enjoyable ways of engaging with the thing.
Yeah. And I think there's something about sort of involving other people in this way where it's safe for you to do so. And it's sort of doing sort of like, like you say, the small, start with tiny little things, little experimentations with it. So my partner and I would, if we've got a problem, we ask each other the question, what do you need from me? So you come home from work and you're like, blah, 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 this is a problem and that's a problem and someone borrowed my cup, blah, 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 blah. And instead of launching into response, we ask a question. What do you need from me? Or do you need to be heard, or would you like a response? So just in this really narrow, tiny little way, just shifting the conversation from being one of automatic response to going, what do you need right now? Do you need response, or do you need to just be heard? Then gives my partner the opportunity to say, I just need to be heard. I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
carry on.
absolutely.
And it's those times.
Yeah, for me also on the other side is also in those situations is to try and remember to keep sight of my own needs, because very often well, again, I find it very easy to be pulled away from my sense of self into someone else's set of needs and experience of the world for a variety of reasons. And so actually that can be just as problematic. It's and so being able to kind of it's the meeting point of both. It's the intersection that for me is the really the place that we're trying to occupy, trying to find, and the way of working with that and from that, rather than rather than it being all about one person or all about the other, because it's always about both. This is this thing.
Yeah.
It emerges from the interaction, not it's not with one group of people or with another entirely. It's always both.
And this is where I quite enjoy your sort of like introducing the language of play, and that's why I wanted to sort of talk about curiosity and experimentation, because none of us are going to get out of this alive. We're just not. And if we take this as being too serious and too, like you say, we get too bogged down and it becomes too easy. Whereas if you sort of step back a little bit and sort of turn it into more experimental, more playful space, it then becomes easier to have these conversations about needs and wants and what you don't understand about me and what you don't understand about me. It becomes more light-hearted, fun. Finding out about each other is fun. It should be fun. But we often, as adults, we get told to be serious and be grown up. And actually, we forget that life should be fun. Should be fun. Yes.
And I think that there's a kind of understanding, a kind of knowing someone on a different level that you can only really get from that, from experiencing that. That it is. I think it is. It's that quality of shared experience. Perhaps there's something about that when we experience the world differently. Is the ability to share that feels well. First of all, I think simply experiencing the world differently can feel shameful. Yet the value in that, when we can express it well, when we can find places where people are seeking exactly that and express it and begin to express it with more skill, is one of the biggest things we can offer to anyone else.
Yeah. And I think I think when we go back to the corporate space, it's one of those things that people sort of like hate, these team building days where you go away and do things, or you build, I don't know, build structures out of paper straws and stuff. But actually, what those are really powerful. I enjoy them. I think they're really powerful and really useful, because they provide they level the playing field a little bit, and they take you into a space of play and fun experimentation where you can then start doing things and have common experiences in a different way than you would elsewhere in the workspace.
I completely agree. I think one of the interesting things for me is I'm actually there's an uncertainty in that kind of space that many people find deeply uncomfortable, and that's their natural experience of the space. My experience of uncertainty is as possibility, and I have the response most people have to uncertainty. I have to certainty. I find it, like, over time, I find it draining and uncomfortable. So because I've occupied that space a lot of time, because I enjoy it, I can share that joy and that comfort with it. In some ways, it's what I kind of do on the show a bit, not so much with you, but with some other guests, where I'm like, I like these kind of exploratory conversations and the stuff where we don't know what's going to happen next. That's my happy, comfortable space. And so I can bring people into that and kind of be with them in a way that they wouldn't necessarily otherwise be able to be. And because I experience it differently, that's what allows me to do that. And so being able to share that, and there are other spaces where other people can do that for me, which enables me to experience things and do things I wouldn't otherwise be able to do myself. And so it's being able to share those is so valuable. And when they're different, when they're relatively rare, they're even more valuable.
I enjoy that sort of the holding possibility, because it sounds like I know we come from a very similar sort of perspective in this, actually sort of, rather than thinking about certainty in the way that things should be done, is to sort of like blow this out of the water and just say, let's be curious about this. There is, like you said, there's a possibility that we're actually going to be able to get on, and we're going to be able to develop a business or a way of working that includes people and makes people feel welcome and part of a community and part of a team and the ecosystem of something that's bigger than a whole. And I think that's one of the things around not being understood is you can feel that you're slightly on the outside of something. And actually, when you start to hold curiosity and start to experiment and start to ask questions, you start bringing people into a community. You start making them feel heard, feel seen, and feel welcomed in a space. And I think that's one of the really important things around building understanding, is that you then build better communities and better relationships with each other.
Absolutely. I think that as a single kind of idea, if you feeling misunderstood and reaching out to and connecting with people with whom you don't feel so misunderstood, and kind of working outwards from that, rather than feeling kind of isolated and that you have to fight it alone, and rather than not being either being disempowered or rejecting the whole thing completely, and kind of walking away, instead connecting with those who also share that some sense of that understanding and inherently get it, and then kind of joining the dots and then bringing other people in and bringing other people in, and eventually it expands out to include everyone, and it's no longer a thing anymore, in quite the same way. It's just normal. But that's kind of, that feels like quite a lot of how you can engage with this process.
But I think this is where I sort of I differ from, well, I do differ and I don't. I think because there are some people that reject the concept of labels and sort of labeling, and I think I would love to get to a point in society where for neurodiversity we just accept that dyslexia is just another type of natural variation in the way the brain works, but we're not there yet. So although I would like to get to a point where I don't need to use a label of dyspraxia and ADHD to describe how I interact with the world, right now I do need that, because it helps me understand how my brain works. It helps me find a community of other people who have similar experiences to mine that I can feel part of. But it also helps people outside of me to have that piece of language to go and research and find out about me, and because we're not at the point yet where we are holding the possibility that everybody can find a space in the world and work in a way that brings the best out in them. I would really like to get to that point. I would like to get to that point where I don't have to describe myself as neurodivergent. I'd like that.
Absolutely. I think, that idea of the purpose of labels being that we can get rid of the label, that's why they're valuable, is because we can use them so we don't have to use them anymore, rather than so they become this kind of thing, this permanent thing. Is it? Absolutely. I think that the less I experience myself as needing that label,
Yeah.
the
And I think
better.
yeah. And I think that's, and it's also, while we still need these labels, it's good to have these sort of common pieces of language to describe ourselves, because we can then go out and find each other
Completely.
and build the community with each other and build the awareness for ourselves and with the people around us. And then that will just sort of like spread beyond that, hopefully.
Absolutely. No, that's a wonderful place to end, I think. And if people want to get in touch with you or have any questions or anything and want to follow up, what's the best way for them to do that?
If you're on LinkedIn, I'm Sara Kedge at LinkedIn. SaraKedge.com is my website. But yes, either of those places, you can drop me an email, Sara@SaraKedge.com, and I will happily chat to anybody about most things, really.
Fantastic. Yeah, we've got a link to the website in the show notes as well. So yeah, that's brilliant. I think I really like the focus on community, and it's something I'm exploring at the moment as well, and working on my own community, and have been done for a very long time, actually. And I think it's such a powerful thing for everyone to join, set up, participate in, and engage. You're not alone, and you don't have to do it alone. It's much easier and more fun if you can find someone else who is kind of experiencing things in a similar way, who does understand.
Definitely. And I think that's one of the things that we found from the House Entrepreneurial community, is that coming together, we have different experiences, but there's also more that brings us together, that's a shared experience than sets us apart. And that just builds sort of understanding and welcoming. It's lovely.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, I hope that got you thinking in the audience, and asking questions. So if you do have questions, please do reach out and ask either of us, both of us, whatever. You might have noticed that Delightful Dissent, if you're watching live, that Delightful Dissent still isn't in its new home, and I still haven't sorted things out, but they are still moving in the background slowly. There's going to be a bit of a break over the Christmas period, so we're going to be coming back in January, and I'm going to be talking to Francis Kalashti, who is a marketing coach who specializes in working with other coaches, and we're going to be talking about get comfortable being uncomfortable. So I think very relatedly, this is a really interesting one. I've never taken kindly to this advice. Whenever anyone has suggested it to me, I've always had to suppress quite a strong response. It very often seems to come from people who are extremely comfortable already, thank you very much, and don't really have any place in telling other people that they should increase their level of discomfort. As a neurodivergent person, I've spent quite a lot of my life adapting, and am often already at some degree of discomfort simply to participate in a space. So people advising that I should increase that isn't always helpful. And I think that conversation around community and becoming comfortable, finding a place where you're understood, is a big part of working outwards from that. So I'm really looking forward to getting into that one, and that's going to be live at 1 p.m. UK time on Thursday, the 20th of January, Thursday the 20th of January 2022, which is why it's confusing me, because next year, wow. Anyway, so thank you all very much for watching. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sara. That was great.
Well,
I hope to see you all for the next episode. But in the meantime, please do go out there and make some delightful dissent of your own. Goodbye.